Well, hi there. I am Dr. Loren M. Hill, and I am your academic career coach. Today, my special guest is Dr. Clytrice Watson. Dr. Watson is the Associate Provost for Academic and Student Services at Delaware State University. She's a good friend of mine. We've actually known each other now for almost a decade. We initially met at a STEM Women of Color conclave, which I'll talk more about that a little later. And those of you who are followers to the podcast know that we mentioned it a few episodes ago with Dr. Orlando Taylor, and Dr. Watson and I both know Dr. Orlando Taylor very well. So welcome, Dr. Watson.
Thank you. Thank you. It's really an honor to be here with you.
Thank you. So let's start by talking a bit about your career in higher ed. So you're currently an associate provost, but you have held other positions. You've been a dean, you've been a chair, obviously you were a faculty. Tell us about what it's been like to be in these leadership positions, to essentially ascend from faculty into administration.
Yeah, so it actually has been a really interesting journey with more ups than downs. I must say more highs and lows. The experiences that I've had have been amazing. When I started out as a faculty member, I knew that I wanted to do something more to have a greater impact on students, and particularly students of color. And as a faculty member, I was very limited. And what I could do, I couldn't really write policy. So I decided I wanted to be a dean. I guess it was my third year in as a faculty member. I said, I'm going to be dean. I want to really be in a position where I can implement some activities to help the students, to help the faculty, and to really make an impact. So I did ascend to the position of dean, and it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. So that was one of those low valleys that I was in. But there were circumstances surrounding that experience. But now as an associate provost, I'm really enjoying the capabilities that I have to help students, to help faculty, to be in a position to inspire and to motivate and to make change.
Well, that is very amazing. And part of what we both share are the passions to help students of color, minority students really navigate this space of the academy, right? It can be very isolating. You may see some faculty who look like you, or you may not if you're at a PWI or another institution. And so when you're having those, few and far between encounters, it's really great to be able to see someone in leadership who represents you, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about, something that we have in common in higher ed, and that is working with people, right? So we don't work in, isolation, although sometimes people will say we are siloed, and that can happen depending on the discipline. You are in your college or your school at the institution, and so you tend to just work with those around you. But there are people that you will encounter if you are trying to promote or if you are trying to serve on certain committees. And so we do encounter other people. And those other people don't always look like us or agree with us. And so I thought we'd spend some time today talking about maybe some of the interpersonal interactions.
Absolutely.
So great. So you and I were at a conclave one year, and we heard Melissa Harris Perry. And so she was talking about her experience in higher ed and really her promotion, right? And I can't remember if she was promoting to full professor, or she was going for tenure.
I believe you're correct. Yes.
Yes. And so she talked about how she thought, she had it in the bag, essentially. She had met everything and in the rubric, only to not get it. And she later found out that there were some men who were not supportive of her. Is that how you remember it as well?
I do. I do.
And so she went on to then talk about these buckets that you might fall into. If you're a woman in higher ed and men can see you as either a daughter or a date or a pet or a threat. And, you and I have experienced, at least one of those four categories, if not four at times, right?
All of them, probably.
And so you and I have talked, at length about what happens between men and women in higher ed. But more recently, we've been talking about the dynamics between women in higher ed. And you presented a few years ago on this idea of mean girls. Can you tell us more about mean girls in higher ed, or the concept of mean girls in higher ed?
Yeah. So let's think back to high school, I know for me, I think about when I was in high school, I wasn't a part of the popular crowd, but there was this certain subset of individuals that were popular, that were pretty, that had the best, fashion sense or what have you. And they were mean. I mean, you're walking down the hall and you're talking about you like loudly. So I know for me, once I graduated from high school, I was so happy. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get away from this. And, you still may have a little bit of have it in college as well. But when you go into your career,
right,
you're thinking, okay, I've worked really hard. I've been blessed. I'm here. Now it's time to really live and love who I am and not have to worry about some of those things from my past. But then, bam, you encounter the mean girl syndrome. And it's like, whoa, I thought I left that in high school. And what I mean by that is the smiling in your face and backbiting behind your back, hating on you. I don't like using that word hating, but that's essentially what it is. For me, going into higher ed, working at an HBCU, I remember my first faculty meeting, I was so excited. And I went in, I saw this Black woman and like, oh, I'm going to sit beside her. And I tried to talk to her and she blew me off just as nice. And I said, hey, how are you? And I introduced myself and I said, I'm new. I was like, whoa, did she really just do that? So I tried again. And I was crushed because I was fresh out of grad school. And I'm like, wow. And to this day, that same faculty member is still at the institution that I'm at. And I just stay away from her.
Wow.
So that was my first encounter of a mean girl, my very first faculty meeting. So that sort of set the tone. I hate to say it, sort of put me on guard. But and I was the only Black woman in my department when I first started.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so there were a couple other white women who were Caucasian. So I just sort of just try to stay under the radar, and eventually you loosen up and you try to trust people because you want to be in a work environment where you can trust your colleagues.
Yes.
And then, there were other relationships with other departments, but that mean girl syndrome was there. And if they saw you trying to just progress in your career, it was an issue. Like, why do you want to do that? Or I wouldn't do that if I was you. But me, I'm saying, well, come on, we can do this, and we can go for this and go for full professor. Well, now that's not really what I want to do. I don't know why you want to do that.
And how about this? Because something that I remember is that, but don't tell her. right?
Yeah.
So leaving others out, right? Like,
Oh,
we can
definitely.
handle it, but we don't want to include her in it.
Definitely. And you'll be surprised how often that goes on. And higher, I mean, as adults. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe this is really happening. And I think and what's really frustrating to me, I left the university for a while and went and did a rotation at the National Science Foundation. And I came back in this administrative role. And I'm thinking, okay, we're at a higher level now. It has to be different, right? Oh no. When you're sitting in meetings and you see, and this is the heartbreaking part, older, more mature women
Yes, yes,
who are just nasty to
yes.
the younger women or even each other. I'm talking the dirty looks,
Mm,
the looks, and to hear the things they say about others behind their back, it's like heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking. And I've watched some of my colleagues just get torn down publicly by
yeah.
women. And I'm like, wow.
And it's amazing to me that it happens on the one hand, but I'm a clinical psychologist, so I study human behavior all the time. And I think that what I would like our listeners to understand as well is that a lot of this comes from insecurity, right?
Absolutely.
So if I'm insecure, whether that's in my work life or home life, or I'm unhappy, then what I will do is lash out, or intentionally or unintentionally make other people miserable. And so I want people to know that there are some things that we can do
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
sort of protect ourselves and our reputations from this, because it really is about your reputations. You can encounter someone who is a mean girl, and they might be in a position of authority, and your reputation will suffer from that. So what
Absolutely.
can someone do if that happens to them?
Well, I actually sort of mentored a young lady who was new to the university, so new to the culture, right? She hadn't worked at an HBCU, and she was experiencing some really bad behavior from some other women at the institution, and she would just be so upset. And surprisingly, some of the things she just said are the things that I told her. I said, look, you have to understand who you're dealing with, all
Mhm.
right? Whatever they're going through, they're projecting it on you. Whatever insecurities they're feeling, they're projecting it on you. And I just broke it down. I said, you dress nice. You're a very attractive woman.
Mhm.
Sometimes women, I guess, when they get older, they start feeling insecure or unhappy about themselves. So they may lash out. Maybe they feel threatened that you may take their position.
Mhm.
So and that's the thing I don't understand. Anyone feeling threatened that someone's going to take their position. I believe in any person in a leadership position should always prepare their successor.
Yes, yes.
So start grooming and preparing your successor, not beat someone down. When you're in a leadership role, you have the power to really develop the next leader.
Mhm.
So to see that, not happening, especially with Black women, I
Yes.
have a real issue with that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
as a
So
leader,
teaching them how to just navigate through the situation. And sometimes, you really just have to hold your head up and
right.
just rise above it and have, let that emotional intelligence kick in
Yes, yes.
and say, look, I'm not here for this. I'm here to do my job. We don't have to be friends,
Nope.
but you can command respect.
Yes, yes. So I really appreciate this from a leader, right? A leader telling us, here's what you can do, and here's what you should be looking out for, right? So if we were to experience someone who has been bruised by this, really, really bruised. Like they're now thinking, you know what, I'm out of higher ed. I just can't take this anymore. I tried to do it, but it really cut me deep, as they would say.
Yeah.
What would you say to encourage someone like that?
That's a great question, because I have to think about the words that I had to say to myself to encourage myself on more occasions than one. And my spirituality is very important to me, and I rely on it to get through my days. So I would tell someone, you have to dig deep into who you are and really understand why you're here. Are you here to fulfill your purpose in life, or are you here to fulfill someone else's purpose, or to be someone else's whipping post? We may not have a lot of power in a lot of things, but we have control over how we respond to people. And sometimes not sometimes, our response is either going to fuel their ill intentions, or it's going to shut them down. So you really have to be able to read the situation, read the person, know your opponent. I hate to say that. You really need to know your opponent. Study your opponent. And I have an art of studying people. And I realize, or I try to determine how I need to deal with that person or navigate with them. So it's really a matter of learning the person that you're dealing with. And that sometimes you just have to humble yourself.
Yes.
And spend some time to get to know them, even if they don't like you. But the more you get to know them, the better you're going to understand how to deal with them.
So that's really helpful. We want to know the person. We want to get to know them. We want to have our protection, whether that's internal, spiritually. And I agree. I think it's always good to really do sort of a gut check, right? Like, why am I here, right? And so if you are able to think about it in terms of your purpose, then there's something outside of yourself. So even when you're, battered or bruised, you can say, okay, I'm here for the students, or I'm here to make sure that my voice is heard. I'm here for this. And it can sort of buoy you. So so that's internal. What about external? Would you ever advise someone to maybe, seek some external guidance, coaching, mentor? What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely. I've always managed to keep an external network to my institution, and that's so important, because what I was not getting internally in terms of coaching and mentoring, I had a network outside the institution I call it my encouragement circle, that I could go to and, share some of the issues that I was having, get advice from others how to deal with some of these issues. The hours program was so critical for my transformation, because I had a coach. I don't know if you had Linda Liang. So I had her as my career coach. And the program itself, the way it was structured, was to restore the confidence, build the confidence that I didn't have, help me to find my inner powers, my superpowers, to say, you know what, I got this.
Yes.
I can do this.
Yes.
So that external network is so important.
And Linda Liang, for those of you who are longtime listeners, was actually one of our podcast guests a while ago. So she wasn't my mentor. I actually had Dr. Beverly O'Brien.
Okay, she's wonderful as well.
Yes, the program was really, really great. And it did teach us a lot about external support, right? And having the importance of having this coach, mentor, sponsor, champion, all of those on your team, and even allies, so that when you are experiencing some difficult times in the workplace, generally based on someone treating you poorly, and right now we're talking about mean girls, then you can talk to your coach or your mentor, or just a trusted confidant, to give you some perspective and some guidance.
And
So
that external perspective is so important because when you're in the mix of a situation, you only see it one way, right?
yes,
And
yes,
sometimes you lose the ability to look at it from different angles or from a different perspective. But
right.
talking to someone else who's not in that situation sort of helps you recenter
Yes,
and,
yes.
and just get grounded about it.
And for me, when I was going through a very difficult time at my one of my former institutions, that network really saved my career in higher ed because I was that person who was like, I'm out of here. I can't take this anymore. I'm done. Right. And then my support team was like, yeah, no, wait a minute, hang on. you know, here's what you're going through, which we're not minimizing it. And yes, you're being treated unfairly, but how about, here's a strategy for dealing with this and being able to, have your sanity.
Right. That's important. Oh my gosh, that's so important. And I have so many situations and some recent ones, as a matter of fact, that that outside network is so important, just to be able to call someone and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. I don't need this. I can just go and do something else. And then they recenter. I'm like, well, you don't want to do that right now.
Well, yes, because it may feel good that moment, but there are moments that will follow that. And, what about your purpose, right? If your
Right.
purpose is to be representative of, populations and demographics that we don't always see, if you're the only one and now you're gone, your voice is no longer heard and you're not able to make those inroads that you had set out to do.
And I think it's so important for us as women to also understand that we can't rely on other people to validate us, right? We have to know who we are within ourselves, because if we rely on other people, especially other women sometimes, to validate who we are or to be our cheerleader, we're in trouble. It's okay to be your own cheerleader. It's okay to sit down and just review, okay, I've done this, this, and this. Hey, I'm a bad sister right here.
I
Look at the
love
things I've
this.
accomplished.
I love what you just said. And in fact, part of one of the strategies that I use when I'm working with people is to really take out your CV or your resume and
Mhm.
review it, right? Because oftentimes we're just going through our day, we're getting the work done, we don't even realize really that we have piled up a lot of work and have even been recognized or maybe not been recognized, but looking at that CV or resume will help really sometimes reorient you. And then if people are really struggling, I recommend that they have somebody else read it to them.
Mhm.
I don't know about you, but there have been times when I have, been an invited speaker, or recently I was a keynote somewhere and someone read my bio and I was looking around like, who is that? I sure want to be her when I grow up, right? So when we hear it from someone else, that can be helpful as well. But, both ways, right? Being your own cheerleader, reading your own accomplishments, looking at your awards. I have some back there. I have a folder of just thank you cards from students over the years, right? All of these things I think can help really, help us turn the corner sometimes when we have been treated poorly or mistreated.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, it's so important to be your own cheerleader, be your own superhero. It's okay. It's not being conceited. It's not considered to be conceited. It's self-preservation,
It,
because you're going to have moments where people are going to beat you down, beat you up, and you're going to feel worthless. And so you have to remind yourself who you are.
I totally agree. And some years ago, I read a book called Smart Women Never Get the Corner Office. And one of the things that she talks about in the book is that women don't want to promote themselves, right? They don't want to like toot their own horn, if you will, or talk about their accomplishments. And sometimes that can be really, to your detriment, because
Yes,
nobody else is going to do this for you. Number one, they don't know all the things that you've done. And so you don't have to go around, being, narcissistic about it, but certainly reminding people, no, look, I have a for real earned doctorate, or I have done this, or do you see the job title on my door? Like, nobody just gave me that. So
exactly.
as women, just sometimes full-throated, letting people know who we are and what we've done will sometimes help to like back some of that off of you, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great, great. So now let's switch reels a little bit. We've talked about, when we've been mistreated by others, and you and I were talking recently, and you are going to be doing a study on this phenomenon. But in your reflection, you recall that there may have been some times when you were a mean girl. Tell us about that. I can't imagine,
Absolutely.
but please do share.
Absolutely. And I believe in self-reflecting. At the end of my day, when I say my prayers before I go to bed, and I ask God to forgive me for my shortcomings, and I think about, did I forgive others for their shortcomings?
Mm,
And there were situations, and I'm not making excuses. Sometimes you become a product of your environment. And
mhm.
when you're in sort of a toxic environment or certain situations, you sort of pick up that same spirit or attitude. And there have been times when I've been a mean girl and I've thought about it, even if it's something as simple as being with another woman or women and speaking ill about someone else.
Yes,
Right?
yes,
That's being a mean girl.
yes.
Um, don't My mother always taught me, don't say something behind someone's back that you can't say to them.
Right, right.
And so fortunately, at some point, I remember saying, I don't want to be around this. But there was more than once that I've been engaged in conversation, negative conversation about another woman, whether it was true information or not.
Right.
I don't think I should have been engaged in that.
Mm,
There have been times when there were certain women I just didn't want to deal with. Most likely I had a reason for it, but there were a couple I didn't really have a reason. I just said, I don't want to deal
right.
with them. I'm not helping them. I'm not engaging. And I think that's unfair. And I'll give you an example. Recently, we had a new lady at our university in a role. I don't want to say the role, but in a position. And I didn't know her. And I kept saying, I really need to go engage, but I'm just going to stay in my lane. I don't really bother because I don't want to deal with that unit. Right.
Right. Right.
And I heard that the lady had a really hard time, and then she was leaving. I found out she was leaving. I was like, I felt horrible. Like I
Mm,
should have reached out sooner.
yeah.
Maybe if she had just found someone to connect with, it
Right.
would not have been so difficult. But because I'm just not dealing with that. I don't want to be
Mm,
in that mix, self-preservation. But I think about, I could have reached out. I could have tried. It
right.
would not have caused any harm to me had I just reached out and said, hey, let's go to lunch. How
Hmm.
you doing? And
Yeah.
I've seen her a couple times on campus, and she came up to me very enthusiastically. Hi, how are you? And I mean, I was nice, but I was sort of aloof. And I'm like,
Right.
I don't
Right.
want someone to treat me like that. That goes back to that first lady I
Yeah.
met when I went to campus. She was
Yes.
very aloof to me. So I did the same thing. And
Mhm.
that's just not fair.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I appreciate your, candor around this and your insight into, some behaviors. And I think you are an awesome leader, and this is the epitome of leadership, to be able to say, you know what, wait a minute, I need to check myself here. And as a leader, what type of behaviors do I want to demonstrate? And sometimes as a leader, the behavior is, hey, going out of your way a little bit just to say hi, right? And when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, that's not a big deal, right? But if you have a million other things to sort of contend with, the prioritize as a leader, saying hi to somebody is going to take some effort, right? Because you got a full schedule, you have to be at this meeting, you have these things to think about. And so it's not just like, oh, let me just wander on over there and shoot the breeze with somebody. You don't have time for that, right?
Right.
But making the time for it, finding the time for it, those small gestures really can make the difference one way or the other in someone, you know, their experience of their workplace.
Absolutely. And I think something else that I think is important that I would like to say, it's so important not to become that product of your environment. And the type of leader that you're trained under can heavily influence the type of leader that you become or the things that you do. And I've experienced that. So you have, as a leader, as a rising leader, be careful who you allow to pour into you or what you allow them to pour into you. Recognize the strong or the positive characteristics or teachings and be able to separate those negative characteristics that you don't want to pick up.
I really like that we're revisiting the environmental factors, right? I have been in very toxic workplaces at universities, and then I've been at healthy places, and the difference is very stark, right? And how not just the leaders, because you might think, I knew that person before, right? And along with them, they were nice. And then all of a sudden they have completely flipped on you, right? And you're like, what happened? And then they become a product of their environment. And so if you're at an institution or a workplace where it is just vicious, or it could even be subtle, right? It could be so subtle that you don't realize it until some time has passed. But I think, as you mentioned, it's important to really reflect on, is this changing me? You know, is this what I really want to stand for? Because I tell people all the time, like, you can get another job, right? You can get another job one way or the other. You can leave, they could fire you, or oh, you could stay there. And so when you know you have these options, you really want to be mindful of, this is a job, but what is your career going to look like, right? And so you may end up moving from job to job as you navigate through your career, but that's okay.
Absolutely, it's okay. And it's important to be comfortable with who you are, right? You don't have to become a product of your environment. And I'm speaking from experience, you know. You can become bitter or toxic, or you can choose to try to stay positive. And it's not easy. I promise you, it's not easy. It's very difficult, but that's where those external networks come into play to help you stay grounded, to remind you of who you are, and to see the glass half full and not half empty.
That is great. That is great. Well, I think you've given us some really good insight, and thank you for your leadership. And I recently went to a great comedy ensemble, Smart, Funny, and Black, with Amanda Seales, for those of you who may be familiar with her. And one of the issues, very, very pro-woman and all this. And she ended her show by saying, hey, you know, if you are a Black woman and you're in the workplace and you see another Black woman come in, go up and say, hey, sis, how you doing, right? And so I would like to broaden that to just say, if you are a woman in the workplace and you see another woman coming in, go up to her and say, hey, sis, how you doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. and smile when you do it.
Yes, we love smiles, right? So
Yes.
thank you so much, Dr. Watson, for talking to us today about this, mean girl phenomenon and how it does sort of unfortunately follow us through to the workplace and in higher ed. And thank you for giving us some insight into that and sharing your experience with it.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always my hope that it helps someone else and maybe they can avoid some of the heartaches or frustrations that I have.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for listening today. Thanks for joining us. I am Dr. Loren M. Hill, your academic career coach. Be sure to subscribe, like, and listen and view us on wherever your social media is. See you next time.